Hi, Sharon. Thanks for joining.
My pleasure.
So today's the first webinar in a series of webinars, 10 webinars that are running over in the next few months just to help post-16 educational institutions with improving their admissions process. And yeah, thanks a lot for joining. Really appreciate it. I'm just going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see that.
Yep.
So yeah, thanks for joining us today. So first of our set of 10 mini webinars that we're running over the next few months, like I was saying, it's going to be focusing on transforming admissions engagement for post-16 educational institutions. So webinar is just going to be a short webinar, half an hour webinar, which we're going to record. If anybody's got any issues with that, please let us know. And then we'll be sending it around to everybody by email and on LinkedIn and social media as well. Reduce the amount of time that we spend on the webinar, Sharon, from an hour to 30 minutes. Just to help with a key issue for staff, which seems to be that they're getting too much work. I don't know how you managed last year with your workload, but how have you kind of found that?
Always interested in further education colleges, and obviously you can vary from college to college. I actually started Newham in June, early June, but I've worked in FE colleges for 25 odd years now. So starting in June was quite interesting in terms of they were just about to start the progression enrolment, but in terms of my overall remit, because enrolment was one of those areas, for me it was very much about understanding the initial stages of their enrolment process, starting with progression, David. So sort of hitting the ground, running fast, trying to see where it could be tweaked and improved for the up and coming main enrolment that was brought forward due to the GCSE results day.
Yeah, makes sense. And how busy would you say you were last year compared to the year before or the year before that?
I think it was, again, like for like, I wasn't at the same college, but I think in general terms, COVID and what happened with COVID did make life, more challenging, just in terms of the fact that, interviews hadn't necessarily taken place face to face. A lot of things have been done virtually. I think learners' mindsets were in a different frame of mind in terms of actually, coming back into, coming out to places, still trying to do enrolment face to face rather than in any sort of virtual world. So quieter in some respects in terms of perhaps engagement with learners face to face and around college campus, but much more busy in terms of looking at, systems and processes and trying to re-engage people that have potentially not been engaged for quite a while.
Yeah, so quieter face to face, yeah, because obviously it's harder for people to come in when the COVID rules keep changing. But yeah, I found a report yesterday. It was a global report. It was from 10,000 educators and educational staff. And it said that staff working over 56 hours a week increased from 20 to 24%, from 5% pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
Which is kind of startling, really. People can work longer at their homes.
Just what I was going to say. Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on what you're measuring, doesn't it? Because I know, myself, I did do a lot of work from home, but I was also in college quite a bit because, when you're managing frontline services and, you've got oversight of your front of house and your telephone lines, communication methods and trying to plan enrolments and progression enrolment, there is a lot of time you need to spend in work. But yeah, because of this working from home culture that we adopted, I found myself going home and still working or working at weekends, which, I may not have done previously.
Yeah. Hopefully that will turn around this year. But do you just want to explain for everybody what your role is, the college that you're at, and what your kind of focus is?
Yeah. So Newham College is in London, in a quite a deprived area of London, although we do get most of our students from our local area. Students do cross borough, so we do get students from other boroughs as well as some of the surrounding county borders. But, generally a lot of our learners do come from the borough of Newham. As I say, lots of deprivation, but also quite a lot in terms of, English of speakers of other languages. So when I'm planning things, I have to think about our communication channels because of that language barrier. As Director of Student Services, I have many functions as many of my colleagues would have. So everything from, schools liaison and making sure that we work closely with our marketing strategies, prospectuses, content, right through to, welfare and safeguarding, admissions and enrolment, the learner journey, right through to being able to collect, destinations and IAG, matrix free accreditations and everything that sort of fits alongside that. So quite a wide remit. But when I started Newham in June, I think there was that, for me, there was that directive that they really wanted me to look at the learner journey in terms of outreach in schools liaison, right through to the progression enrolment, following through to, main enrolment, and looking at systems and processes to do with ensuring our conversion rates, weren't necessarily going to be improved immediately, but that we were at least looking at where there might be dropout on a conversion.
So you got a big job, basically.
Yeah.
So the whole student journey you kind of manage from a student services point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah, big job. So I'll just give everybody a brief overview of what Purlos does. So we help post-16 educational institutions increase their revenue, increase their growth rate while reducing dropouts during the admissions process. And I'm wondering, I kind of wanted to put it back to you, Sharon. What would you say we do from your side? Because I've got a million different answers, and it's kind of interesting to see what clients see us as from their side.
I think understand, as you know, David, I've been in contact with your company for a number of years. So I think there's a couple of things. Yeah. I think it's understanding the product, understanding perhaps this. And when I say simplicity, I don't mean you've got a simple product as in it's not fit for purpose, but the simplicity of integrating it into our systems and how we can use it without there being a large staff resource sitting behind it. And in fact, helping me with some of my issues around staff resources during, a busy enrolment period. I think from a client perspective and perhaps from senior management, executives, principals, it's understanding how, perhaps the cost of the product then integrates with, revenue, and how actually when you look at, I can give some examples later, but when you look at how impactful your product can be in terms of bringing in that revenue that you may not have had previously because, you didn't have the resources or the systems in place to reach out to those hard to reach applicants.
And what would you say our system is? Would you say it's a communication system? Would you say it's an admission system? All of the above? In the simplest way, how would you describe it? Yeah,
I suppose it is another communication tool. It's a different communication tool in terms of what I've been used to using. So, it simplifies reaching out to learners on a platform that they may be more engaged with rather than traditional emails. So I think there's that element around communication, but there's also the element, I suppose, about providing information in a different way, rethinking. A lot of what we do is very, when you're sending out letters or emails, it can be quite, long-winded. It can be a bit on the professional side in terms of making sure, that the wording in it's correct. And of course, using your platform, that's broken down and it's a staged process rather than a one hit and not knowing whether you're going to get a response or not.
Yeah, makes sense. So just for viewers, just going to explain exactly what we do quite simply. So the product, it is a half human, half tech-based digital assistant to allow colleges to make it easier for students to ask questions during the admissions process in the 6-week period. And we do that using WhatsApp instead of email and phone, which is becoming less and less effective. And then for admissions staff, we give them access to our platform, which will use AI to highlight which students are most at risk of dropping out and why. And that's kind of a simple overview of it, but it's developing all the time. I guess one of the big things we want to look at is how we can eventually reduce workload for colleges. How are you managing workload? I know you said you had a bigger workload because you're working from home, smaller workload in terms of students coming to events because fewer people are coming in physically. But what about your team? How busy is the college as a whole? And when they get really busy, how do you manage that?
Yeah, so in terms of Newham College, I suppose I'm lucky because I do have quite a large admissions team, but they deal with a lot of back office that perhaps traditionally would sit within an MIS or a student information centre. So they're not just dealing with applications; they're dealing with everything to do with that learner coming into college, including your learner numbers and prior learner record downloads and checks, the advanced learner loans, residency, fees, collection of fees. They also man the main college switchboards and information lines. So they're doing all of the initial course advice and helping, set up open events and etc., etc. We've got 2 campuses. So I think that's, for me, when you're managing across more than one campus, we're not a merged college, so we're a standalone college. So, those 2 campuses are managed by, a team that split themselves across both sites. And we do enrolments on both sites. So we're running, 2 sets of activities at the same time, expecting to deliver the same amount of, quality customer service, which can also be a challenge.
Does anybody work after normal working hours ever? During the busy period of admissions, or?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, even during the year, as we've now moved into interview events for our learners, because we are doing that face to face, and our open events, that means that staff in admissions can be there, and not just admissions. Obviously, there's other staff that support them, but they can be there till 7, 8 o'clock at night. And in terms of enrolment, it's that's as long as it's broad. We start when we need to start, and we finish when the last client has finished their enrolment, and if there's problems or questions or queries, then we keep going until that last prospective learner is out of the building.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess a good place to start is we always like to look at what's the problem. Like what was the problem for you when you started working with us? What do you think the biggest admissions problems were?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that communication, doesn't it? Postage isn't necessarily effective. So when I started at Newham, I was told that they didn't use a postal system anymore, so they weren't posting letters out, to applicants or sending any information out in a paper format. The default position, if you like, was email. So they were pretty much reliant on learners, making their online applications, putting in a correct email address, taking that email address and hoping that it was correct, and sending out all communication to do with application interviews, application offers, invites to enrolment. That's all being pushed out by email. And I think, my initial quickest identification of a problem, if you like, was where I saw that there were a large number of learners that have been withdrawn from the application system because they'd missed 3 interviews.
Yeah.
And of course, for me then, looking at the integrity of that and analysing that, it was very much like, well, if they hadn't turned up to their first interview and we didn't actually know that they'd got that email or read that email, or it was a live, and we just then kept inviting them by email, it's no wonder that after 3 attempts, we'd still not heard from them. And then to just withdraw them meant that there had been no actual, what I'd call hot lead. The hot lead of the initial application had gone very cold because all we'd done is invite them, through an email address. And if we had made phone calls, there was no way of tracking it. I would talk to staff and they'd say, oh, yeah, we have phoned people, but it wasn't really being called, identified, recorded. A lot of the feedback was, oh, well, nobody answered the phone, or the mobile phone number's wrong. So I had no real feel for those withdrawn applications in terms of were they still live leads or not.
Was there a chance of them, enrolling with you, and maybe they just missed emails?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Shame. So potentially a big group of students that actually did want to come, but maybe because of the poor communications channels that have used and the lack of ability to perfectly track them, maybe made it a bit more difficult to get more enrolments than you could have possibly gotten.
And I also think, David, is the fact that when you're using an email, it's not a live system. You can't see what's going on. You were very much then waiting to see if that person responded, and they tend to be from generic email addresses. So again, there was no way of tracking back to sort of say, okay, that person responded, what was the problem? When did that communication happen? If it was followed up via phone call. So I had, when I was being asked to provide data and explanations to our executive team, I just didn't have a go-to place to be able to find, good analytical data and to see, at what point in the journey the student might be. But also from the student's point of view, if they changed their mind, it was almost like they had to start again. Yeah, which is more work again, I guess.
Yeah. What about the planning side of things? You said you had a big team, so you've got quite a lot of roles other than just managing admissions. So last year, what about this year? How are you looking at planning? How early do you start? How do you kind of structure that whole thing?
Yeah, so already we have planned. Way back before the summer, as I started, I was almost looking at this academic year in terms of an interview schedule, in terms of communication channels, in terms of when a student comes for an interview, when a student gets an offer, how are we going to identify that in our systems? We're looking at the back end processes and systems. In terms of having your system now, it means that I've been able to start looking at when we're going to send out, particular messages, when we're going to plan our campaigns, so that we're not doing it all last minute, and there's some thought can go in when the key points are in terms of chasing up, missed interviews or reminding people to accept their offers, looking at our open event information.
Yeah, so that's kind of a key point. So what are the key points? You said any students that have missed interviews, events, are there any other key kind of points?
Well, I was talking to, I work very closely, obviously, with your team in terms of support. So we're now looking at how we would fit in interview reminders. So making sure that if we are inviting students for their interviews, we can then have an interview reminder sent out in a timely way. Then after that, it would be about, missed interviews, being able to communicate with learners around to having missed an interview and what their next steps need to be.
Yeah.
If there's any questions they've got, because I think sometimes it's the additional questions that come off the back of then, communicating with them. Then after that, it's going to be about reminding them to accept their offers. So,
quite important.
Yeah, I mean, they're still not a student till they walk through the door and do the enrolment. And we do know, I'm not, and I'm sure all of my colleagues are not under any myth that students don't go for multiple interviews and they accept multiple offers, and they also do multiple enrolments. But, everything you can do to communicate with them and try and tease out of that potential student, where they are in the process and what their thought process is around accepting your offer, turning up for enrolment. So, confirming their offers. And then after that, it would be the messages around, coming for enrolment, if you like. So when we're booking their enrolments, did they turn up for their enrolment slot? And we'll be able to use that on for our, progressing learners as well. Because although they're in college, you don't always get the feedback you need from curriculum in terms of finding out if the learner really is progressing. And then as we move through the main enrolment cycle, it again is those chase-ups around students that have said that, I suppose it's those late applications. So when you're actually in enrolment and you've got people still applying, we can use that to remind them, to come and enrol, and, again, to unpick any applicants that have gone cold within the initial stages. We can use Purlos to still ask them if they're interested in coming to one of our enrolment events. And then after that, it's that initial 6 weeks. As you say, we use the system then to ask our learners about induction. So had they missed induction? Where were they? Were they still going to turn up? And then some student service introduction. So, was there anything else we could help them with? Were there any questions they had in those first 6 weeks around student support, around enrichment? Were there any additional questions around timetabling or settling in that they might need to ask?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. You said, you're aware that people apply for different colleges, multiple applications, go to multiple events. I think one thing that we saw from our data is that students were applying to more places last year than the year before, de-risking themselves. But a lot of the colleges we spoke to were just happy that an application form had been filled out, and we were maybe advising them to be more skeptical about every application. So if a student comes to an event online or face-to-face and they fill out an application form, once they've filled it out, do you just expect them to turn up on day one of term? How skeptical are you about those applications in terms of application numbers compared to proper enrolments?
Yeah, I'd say you're absolutely right. They're always, you always have overinflated application numbers. But I suppose it's, again, for me, it's about that sense of the learner journey. So the more you can engage with the learner and get to know the learner, even if it is, over a digital platform or even if it's just by communication, the learner feels like they belong to your organisation before they've started. Yeah. So, I think if you can keep them engaged throughout an application process, and, some of our applicants in the post-16 sector will start applying, at the start of year 11. So, late September, early October, our applicants start coming in. We start our interview process, normally just after October half term. So, late October to early November. So that's a long while. If you've had someone interviewed, that early and given them an offer that early, it's a long while to keep them warm, if you like, until you expect them to turn up in, GCSE results day and make an enrolment.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And what about the other teams, marketing, admissions, student services? Obviously, I mean, what we see from day one of term is the campaigns that are sent out through our system go dramatically down for the first few days of term. So how do you dealing with those different teams? Admissions, student services.
Yeah, I think, it is about, and we touched on it earlier, isn't it? It is definitely about forward planning for me. As I say, I've not been at Newham that long, but it's about making sure each of the teams knows the responsibilities of the other team. So they're not working in isolation, they're working as a wider team. So, for me and all the years I've done this work, I tend to bring all of those teams together through that period, so that they're not working as isolated teams. They all get involved, if you like, in all functions. And, you have to be specific. So, you need your marketing to be looking at your marketing campaigns that are going out. You need your front of house to still be picking up, the telephone calls that are coming in and the generic inboxes that are being emailed by, external people. And you need your student service teams to be, looking at your vulnerable learners and giving those vulnerable learners, assistance, if you like, if they've got questions about transition, because it's that transitional bit. What are the questions student might have when they're transitioning from a school, from being home educated, from coming in as an asylum seeker from a different country, moving counties because they might be a looked after child. So it's making sure your most vulnerable learners have a channel of communication and can be supported by the right people.
Yeah, that's quite important. You're saying which the teams know which jobs are theirs. Even at our company, we do something called a RACI, which is RACI. It's a responsibility assignment matrix. And we constantly have to update it every 6 months, i.e. do marketing know which campaigns are definitely for marketing, and do the admissions team definitely know which ones are for admissions? And it can get quite complicated sometimes. And what about data? Data kind of links in with managing the senior leadership. If you buy a system like Purlos, or if you're trying to be effective with admissions, what are the key, and I know what you're going to say, but what are the key kind of data points that you want to look at?
So again, it's really about, if you put Purlos aside for one moment, for me, what my executive team are interested in, the principal is what are the expected numbers? So, the more I can get good solid data around, are these people actually communicating with us on a regular basis? Are they people that we're likely to see? Are we in contact with them? Do we know what their questions are, and can we support them, right through to that enrolment? I think, conversion rates, there are lots of different conversion rates we can talk about, number of applications compared to a previous year. Then you've got to drill that down by, curriculum area, then particularly by, course level, and then right down to, an individual course, if you like. Are there going to be courses you're going to, need to close? Are there going to be courses where you're going to need to put on more classes? What are the number of at-risk learners because they have made their applications, accepted an offer, but they're just not turning up? What's that about? Have they gone and enrolled somewhere else? And if they have gone and enrolled somewhere else, do we know why? So I think that's something else that when we then got Purlos and can use Purlos because of the way it's set up and the responses, we actually started finding out why learners were going somewhere else. Sometimes you can do nothing about that. If they wanted to do A-levels and they were just trying to cover all bases in case they didn't get the grades, then of course they're probably going to end up going to an institute that offers A-levels. But if it was something more, in terms of reputation or customer service, or they were worried about something, at least we were finding that out really quickly and being able to then, talk to that learner to see if there's anything we could do to support them.
Yeah. I think it's a really good point. There's a lot of different parts of the process where you can have conversions, and one might be inquiry to application, application to enrolment to the end of the 6-week period. There's going to be an extra 90,000 students in the 16 to 19-year-old category over the next 5 years in further education. So it's going to be harder and harder to get the same conversion rate. But as long as you are doing better than the benchmark, then that's where you want to be. But if you've got that many extra students in further education, if you've got a large 16 to 19-year-old population, what that is going to mean is more work, which either means more people or more automation will be needed. In terms of working with us, what do you think in terms of some of the campaigns, some of the messages? Did you have any successful ones?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've all been successful for different reasons. So our initial campaign was reaching out to those learners, as I say, that had been withdrawn on our system by the college in terms of an application because they hadn't ever responded to us and hadn't turned up for an interview. And when I say turned up, that might have just been giving us details so that we could do a virtual interview. And, if we phoned them and emailed them, we weren't really getting any response. And the phone number was, or the email address, we couldn't validate whether it was, a live or working email or if it was a correct phone number. So that was our first campaign in terms of, reaching out to those learners via WhatsApp and then being able to ask them the questions around, were they still interested? Did they still want to come and enroll? Et cetera, et cetera.
I think our account manager that's looking after Newham, she said that I think you got 60 students to enrol that had initially withdrawn off one of the messages.
Yeah, so it was just over 60. So, in that first messaging campaign, right on, and we were in enrolment. It wasn't, because of the time I started and what we were doing, we were at enrolment, and we managed to reach out to those students and say to them, thank you for your application. We know that you didn't come to us for an interview. However, we are now open for enrolment. Please come along. And it asked them to select, yes, I'm interested, or I need further information, or, I'm not interested anymore, or I'm a little undecided. Could someone get in contact with me, and give me some advice and guidance? So, yeah, it was about 66, I think, in the end, or something like that, that did actually then turn up off the back of that message.
Great. Amazing. Well, that's good. Hopefully we can replicate that this year. And so this webinar is supposed to be a product walkthrough rather than looking at trends and analysis in the industry. So I'm just going to do a quick walk through the product. I don't know if you've actually ever seen the product. So you've seen it in the demo, Sharon, but I'm guessing that you basically give this to your team now to manage.
Yeah, so in the initial stages, I did this myself because obviously I wanted to get good product knowledge. I wanted to know how it worked. I wanted to make sure that when I handed it over to my admissions manager, I knew how to get the best from it and could support them in setting it up. And it wasn't, I think that's the danger sometimes, David. Colleges buy products. It's not managed by, anyone senior. It sits in the background somewhere. Nobody's really sure and gets a bit frightened of it, and nobody ever uses it. So, my ethos is, it's for a product like this, I take the time to understand it, to use it myself, to see how it works. And then I can do that, peer-to-peer training with my colleagues. And I also then can audit what's happening and make sure we're getting the best use out of a product like this.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest thing we've seen over the last year is the senior people who buy the system and they give it to the team and then they leave it till the end of the year. So we're basically trying to create a part of the system where the senior leadership team can have some really useful insight really quickly and get emailed about it regularly. So they get a bit of an update that's actually useful to them in a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. But that is interesting. So I'll just run through the product quite quickly. So there's 4 key areas. There's the dashboard page, which is the data around high-risk students. There's the list of students, which is a list of students. And there's the queries list. So Purlos actually answers between about 75 to 85% of the commonly asked queries, but there's always queries that would go back on the platform for the college's admissions team to answer. And that's where they would answer them. And that's the most popular area. And we've just created a brand new roadmap. So we were talking about planning, and the roadmap is about setting out your campaigns early on, whether it's around getting people to fill out partial applications, figuring out if they will really want to accept their offers, all of those key steps that we were talking about. This can pre-plan them, and that's brand new. So just briefly to go through the dashboard, we've got a lot of data here, which is potentially quite useful. The conversion level is a predictor. So it has a lot of different data points in it. One is digital engagement, which is seen as pretty highly linked to dropout during the admissions process. And then we get other data points based on sending surveys out to students. And the surveys would be around the kind of main risk areas, which is college choice. Do they want to go to another college? Course selection, are they on the right course? Have they got high stress or anxiety levels? Have they got financial worries? Are their friends going somewhere else? And if we get negative answers back from those surveys, it gives you a bit of an idea per student and also as a total cohort what the risk level is. So I can show you a little bit of an idea of what one of those survey questions look like. I don't know if you ever got involved in the conversational design, Sharon, but this was one we sent out for course selection. It says, hey, student, how do you feel about your course selection with X college? Excited, fine, unsure. And I guess the key thing that we see is that we send out messages when colleges can't at 8:45 on a Friday night. That's a tip, most popular time. And it's on WhatsApp. It's a very popular platform, which is on 93% of phones in the UK. And the biggest thing is they're short and you just have to press one digit. So that's how we get quite a lot of data back from the students. And it starts to give a bit of a predictor of the conversion level. But also you can drill down per student. You can drill down per course as well. So for instance, if you had a student here, you could see their individual risk reason. If the student's risk reason was the travel costs were too high, but they didn't know that you offered cheap or free bus routes to their area, that could be something that could help a conversion. So that's data for the SLT team. And then if you look at the students area, you can click into specific students and see their individual student risk score. So you can see conversations here. This is a typical example. So hi student, it's Jenny here from the student experience team at Newham College, for instance. Thanks for your application. We're delighted that you're planning to join us. And a typical answer from a student might be, I went for an interview, or I haven't had a phone call, I haven't seen an email. Maybe that email went to junk. Can you tell me what's going on? Can you tell me when I'm getting my timetable? These are kind of typical questions that we get, and we would answer them for the colleges before your team would answer any more highly complex, valuable queries themselves. And then just to go into the queries tab. So this was designed around college feedback. So we've got a list of queries and issues that students have, and new queries would come in here. They'd be dragged into in progress, and then they'd be delegated back to Purlos, who would answer the questions for the students on the college's behalf. And you can see a case or a query from a high-risk student. We highlight any issues that they've got, and then the admissions team would just go into here, fill out the resolution, save it, and then complete that resolution. And what we did actually add recently, which was requested by probably about 80% of the colleges, was a bit of an idea of how fast they're getting back to the students as well. And we've gone from weeks to minutes for a lot of our clients. So what's the average response time? How many queries that are unresolved need answering? How many of them are high risk? So that was pretty useful. And I would say that this is, I don't know if you've seen this, Sharon, have you seen this new feature yet? You might not have seen it yet, but it's basically a product roadmap. So just about what we were talking about before, you can plan all of your campaigns. So you can create a roadmap here. You can create a campaign and then select a template. And then you can plan every single month for the rest of the year to improve conversion rates. So that's just a bit of an overview. And yeah, we're coming to the end of time now. So I don't know if there's any other points you wanted to go through, Sharon, but there's one area I was talking about. I don't know if you've seen this graph.
No, I went through the planning with Alice the other day, so I'm aware of the planning tool now. So that'd be nice because it means we can put the campaigns in nice and early, and rather than trying to do everything last minute.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll help the organisation. This is a bit of data from the whole of last year. So we've got over 30% of the further education market using the admissions convert tool at the moment. So this is an aggregation of all of the campaigns sent out. So you can see some things which are quite interesting. I mean, obviously campaigns would go up straight after GCSE results day, trying to secure students. Last year, there was a big move towards some students moving into sixth forms because potentially over an inflated grades and that whole debacle, and it being tougher for FE colleges to go into sixth forms. So hopefully that will slightly reverse this year. But these were some of the most popular times of campaigns, straight after GCSE results day, after A-levels as well. At the start of term, you can see that the campaigns go down quite a lot. And that's just because colleges generally have a lot of work to deal with getting all the lessons started and have a lot more work at that point. And then this was the most busy time. So a lot of colleges, trying to make sure that students don't drop out by the end of the six-week period. Sending as many campaigns to support students during that 6-week period. And we saw between 4 to 8% dropout during the 6-week period. But the main messages that we sent out were swap, don't drop messages around getting students on the right course early. And we also sent messages around anxiety and stress, especially last year, because stress and anxiety went from the 7th biggest risk to the 2nd. But what's quite interesting is for the top 5 colleges that we worked with in terms of their ROI, their return on investment, their impact, their conversion rate, the peak of campaign messages actually was back here. So it was about 4 to 6 weeks earlier. So what we see is if you double the amount of campaigns during the 3 busiest months of admissions, that has a massive positive effect on your conversions. But also if you start earlier, that has a big impact as well. So I thought that was worth saying. But yeah, I don't know if you've got any more questions, Sharon, but in terms of the main challenges, I can give you a little bit of an overview of what we've seen. I don't know if you've got any thoughts about what potentially might come up this year. You got any worries this year?
No, I mean, not really, just that same adage, David. We've always got to look at our income. So, it means looking at staffing every year. I do use a lot of temps through the enrolment period. And it's, that budget tends to get cut. So, for me, it is about using systems like yours effectively, helping that, make our processes more efficient and takes our staff resourcing and puts it where it needs to be, rather than staff spending hours and hours and hours on the phone, not getting very far with it, or, using emails and just mindlessly sending out emails where we don't actually know what the impact measure is going to be.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, biggest issues we saw last year was that email and phone could be ineffective. So we started using other channels. We also saw busy admissions teams. So whether you want to automate things or whether you want to think about the way the processes are done. I mean, that was partly due to COVID and people working from their desks and working harder. But that was definitely a challenge. Not having significant data on really if that student really wants to come to your college. We saw events as well. How effective are those events? Are they all physical? Are they all virtual? Is there a clear call to action? If they fill out an application form, are you actually being skeptical about that application form, as they might have applied to many places? And then 6-week dropout was higher for quite a lot of our clients as well. So how are you looking at reducing that? So that's it. Thanks. It was great to have you, Sharon. Thanks a lot for taking some time. Incredibly busy time at the moment. And we'll send you the recording, and looking forward to working with you a little bit more.
Lovely. Thanks very much. Take care, everyone.
Great.
Bye-bye.